research and effort has been going into more so the patient side when we talk about marketing to them and strategy, and probably a little bit less on the caregiver side. But the reality is that as our society continues to age, there's an increasing number of people who are taking care of their loved ones. And along with that trend is going to come opportunities that as marketers you guys can embrace and grow from a communication standpoint, to allow you to stay in touch with the caregivers, but you also need in the back of your head think about the patients as well. So what I'm going to do is go over a few things. There we go. In terms of objectives, goal is to talk about each audience, how it impacts strategy, how it drives media selection, and then shapes the information that you guys want to capture in terms of determining results. Now, being a caregiver or a patient, it's not just a title. In our opinion, it's more of a role. Whoever that person is, either the patient or caregiver, is making important life decisions each day, choosing doctors, dealing with certain procedures, addressing medications, and then also, depending upon the severity of the ailment and the treatment, they might need to have somebody taking care of what's going on at the house. And while that role of patient or caregiver defines people to a certain point, it's not the sole factor when it comes to understanding them, understanding strategy, and communicating with them. So we do need to always keep in mind, the age of the individual, patient or caregiver, lifestyle. If it's a caregiver, what's the relationship they have with the patient? Is it their child? Is it a spouse? Is it an in-law or a cousin? The severity of the illness and media consumption, obviously. So I want to do kind of a quick understanding of the size of the caregiver audience, because that in itself is kind of an eye-opener. It might be shocking to some that there's 45 million people that are expected to be a caregiver by the year 2020. But I think what's the biggest eye-opener is that 50% of them back in 2014 were over the age of 50, and then about 50% or so were younger. And when I start talking to people and they realize that a quarter of them are Gen Xers or a quarter of them are millennials, it kind of redefines who a caregiver is, because most people are thinking it's a spouse or a child. And that is true, but it could also be in-laws or siblings or friends or neighbors or some extended family like a nephew or a cousin. So the reality is, and I think I'm going to stress this throughout the whole webinar, as well as the research and gathering information to drive to reveal results, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all audience, and a lot of it has to do with defining that individual, whether it is the caregiver or the patient, what they look like and their lifestyles and so forth. So, as we talk about the differences between these individuals and how it can run across the spectrum, the reality is that things like income and lifestyles impact how you guys communicate with them and what to say, because knowing what their lifestyle is like is more paramount, or maybe equally as paramount as knowing that they are the caregivers and so forth. So the subtle and not so subtle differences between a caregiver or patient or the age spectrum can affect how we're going to talk to them, how we're going to communicate, how we're going to engage through marketing strategies, and then ultimately, the information we're going to gather. So to give you guys a clear understanding of the different audiences in these roles, caregiver versus patient, I'm gonna kind of walk you through a couple of scenarios with kind of real life situations, if you will, between a caregiver and a patient, so you can kind of understand that relationship they have and how these things are just not a one-size-fits-all. It's not as easy as saying, oh, a caregiver is X, Y, and Z. Caregivers, much like patients, come in all shapes and sizes. So the first one is, I'm going to talk about Claire. Claire was recently diagnosed with cancer requiring complicated and debilitating treatment that will require someone to care for her. Claire's sister, Kimberly, must step in as a system of support and assistance throughout the course of Claire's treatment. So Kimberly is a sister, age 66, she becomes the default caregiver and who we want to focus on. The stats, fairly straightforward. Retired, age 66. At that age, you're going to find some individuals, have a high school degree, maybe didn't finish high school. You might find some that actually graduated college, married, conservative. They have a very well-meaning personality and disposition. They're friendly. They're happy with their standard of life. They're good with responsibility. They probably raised kids at some point, even though they're not living in the household. So, taking over somebody's lifestyle, taking over somebody's responsibilities is no big deal for them. Family is important, so obviously that matters when they're stepping up to the plate. From Kimberly's point of view, for her own sake, not just from a caregiver, but from her own sake, she has a very progressive approach a very proactive approach to her healthcare. She sees doctors regularly. She takes their advice. She tries to eat healthy and balanced. She, does preventative medicine. She looking for information on healthcare, and she's not too busy to take care of herself. Those kind of things roll over into her role as a caregiver. She still follows those practices. She understands that eating well is important. Getting information about the ailment, the treatment, the different options. She's obviously required to take care of some of the daily household responsibilities. So communicating and explaining healthcare is kind of second nature to her. She does it for herself, and those attributes are going to kind of roll over into her role as a caregiver. At the age of 65 plus or so, her media habits are kind of what you would expect. Heavy influence on or heavy reliance on traditional media, TV, radio, forms of entertainment, reads a lot of the magazines, newspapers, less so in the digital world, not heavy into technology. It's not a key component of her lifestyle or her day-to-day. Does not use digital to have social interactions as much as some people do. And on the right side, you can see the quintiles. I'm assuming a lot of you guys are familiar with quintiles, but what they do is they look at usage across different media channels and rank them into 1/5. So the offline world, very traditional for 65 plus, is going to have a highest usage quintile, where the internet at home is going to have fairly low. So you can see that internet is not a huge component of what their daily lifestyle. So the strategy, when we talk about it, strategy is not too different from what you would think. When talking with somebody like Kimberly, you have to earn her trust and her respect. But you're tasked from a strategy standpoint with going the extra mile, is you have to remember she's making decisions for somebody else. And these are decisions that potentially could change that patient's lifestyle, pain, medication, treatments, doctors, and so forth. So it's a big undertaking. She takes that responsibility very seriously. As a caregiver, caregivers are notorious for asking more questions sometimes than the patient themselves. They're trying to go that extra mile, due diligence to make sure that they're getting the information correct. They have an understanding of the, and so attention to detail when communicating with them is very important. Their decision-making process is also very methodical. In some ways, this process can take longer, especially thinking about Kimberly, who's taking care of her sister Claire. If there are other family members that Kimberly has to consult with to discuss next steps, options, treatments, changing doctors, or what have you, and procedures, those kind of things take time. It's not your normal patient that can make a decision for themselves on the fly there, when they're at a hospital. So you have to think about it differently. And while there is lag time between the decisions or during the decision-making process, that requires more opportunities for you guys to continue the conversations with them. In terms of the media selection, with the age bracket that we're talking about in this particular scenario, kind of a traditionalist in media usage, you're going to see a lot of the offline world. The problem with that is an enormous amount of clutter. You lack the digital capabilities for tracking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about tracking on the offline world in a few minutes. But it can be more challenging. So you've got to overcome with clutter. Think about the caregivers as a consumer themselves. The patient is no longer a consumer per se, but they still are, dependent upon the severity of the ailment, they still can be influencers. So you're actually talking to several audiences at the same time, which always makes it a little bit more interesting. So the second audience I wanted to talk about is William. Had a heart attack on a golf course, recovering. He needs continuous needs, which require ongoing attention from someone to help with his medical and daily life activities. Being loving children, Jennifer and David step up into the role of caregiver. So you're dealing with children in this instance, ages 40 and 42. So the stats are a little bit different than what we're talking about with Kimberly. You see a higher increase of employment, higher education. Divorce tends to spike in these scenarios. And this is all, let me back up. A lot of this, majority of this research is pulled from Simmons or national data, articles that we looked at, white papers and so forth. So I have all the sources if you guys are interested, but a lot of it is Simmons. So I should have said that at the beginning. When you start talking about divorce, you see a lot of use of condos and apartments instead of a traditional standalone house, kids in the home. Since they are educated, they're intelligent, they're well informed. They do take a middle of the road responsibilities because, quite frankly, they've got a lot on their plate. They've got kids, they've got jobs. They do think spending time with family is important. They do keep up with celebrity news and things like that. They're still willing to help others out, but they do worry about themselves a lot. And at this age, when you have kids in the home, I'm sure some of you guys can relate to this, kids start having an impact on their selections of brands and purchasing decisions. So their approach to healthcare, for themselves at least, is a lot more relaxed than what we saw in Kimberly. They don't go to the doctor regularly. They feel that their eating habits and diets are not up to par, not up to the standard where they should be. When they do get sick, they don't always go to the doctor, but they will drive themselves to work. They are too busy to take care of themselves. They do have a higher acceptance level with technology, so they're willing to go online, look around, get some information for health-related issues, register on websites. When they put on their hat of being a caregiver for their parent or their spouse or what have you, in this particular scenario, it's for their parent, their father, they do step up a lot more. They are a lot more proactive. They are looking for information. They are looking for ways to make decisions. They sometimes tag team because their life is so hectic. There might not be just one caretaker making decisions. There could be multiples, siblings, and so forth. So it becomes challenging, not only talking about the patient as a potential influencer and the caregiver as a decision maker, but there might be multiple caregivers in this type of role. Media habits, because of their kids, you see their media habits kind of a little bit more interesting and diverse in their age, a little more diverse than what we saw with Kimberly. You see them online a little bit more. They're not using TV as much. It's not their main source of entertainment or gathering information. They don't rely on newspaper like other audiences do. They are aware of ads, but they aren't really influenced by ads as much. They use their cell phones for just about anything, as opposed to Kimberly, who uses her cell phone primarily for calling only. The internet has changed how they live their lives. It is a primary source of information. They're comfortable with it. They pay attention to ratings and reviews, which, for doctor ratings and things like that is critical. They are on social media a lot. And so when you look at this chart in the bottom right, you see the quadrants, you see more diverse information. While they're still using cable and magazine, it's on the lower end. Newspaper, prime time, TV all day, kind of an average viewer. Outdoors very high, kind of lends itself to their crazy hectic lifestyle. They have kids, they're always on the go. Internet at home, we saw peaks of highest quadrants, and we also saw some peaks of second lowest. So there's a kind of a split bag there in terms of the internet, but internet clearly plays a major role with them. So the key to a strategy for Jennifer and David kind of revolves around the realities of their job. Being a caretaker is a full-time, or a caregiver is a full-time job. Saw research that says in an extreme case, it can be 40 plus hours a week. Now they have a job already. They have kids, they have work, they have travel, they have household responsibilities. So, they're completely overwhelmed. And on top of that, one thing we found, we see a lot with research and information we've gathered, is that caregivers don't always consider themselves as a caregiver. They think it's just their duty, their responsibility. I'm taking care of my dad. They don't see it as a title per se, or a role. So between the crazy hectic lifestyle, juggling everything, and them just not even thinking that caregiver is them, they don't even look at themselves in the mirror like that, it's kind of difficult to pin them down and difficult to communicate with them. On a plus side, from a strategy standpoint, is that they are very open to technology, hands down, much more than Kimberly was. But they want to use technology to help them as caregivers, help them manage schedules, help them manage medication, help them communicate with not only their siblings, but also their professionals, the doctors and nurses and so forth. And they do like that personalized information. So there's kind of a huge opportunity there from a communication and strategy standpoint, is how to employ technology, whether that's apps, whether that's something as simple as email, but to make their lives better, make their lives easier, because they are very stressed about this. Just doing a Google search on caregiver support the other day, 38 million results showed up. And while they won't label themselves as caregivers, they completely understand and are being impacted by the stress of being that person. Many of them say that there is stress, and they go online looking for some sort of an outlet or a resource to help with that. Many of them are interested in technology to support these tasks, so hopefully alleviate or reduce some of the stress that goes into this role. Craft the message that considers the needs of the patient as well as the caregiver. I mentioned it that it's not a completely one-sided conversation, depending upon what the ailment is. The caregiver can be the decision maker ultimately, but in some cases, but the patient can also have influence. So definitely don't look at it as just one person you talk to. The best strategy is position the hospital as a resource. Okay, they're stressed, they're looking for information. In some cases, this is completely new territory for the caregiver. So education is a must. Make the role for them as easy as possible. Provide solutions. Give them information on how to navigate the system, where to get that. So as much content and information as you can provide, the better you are to arm them with that and help them make decisions. So our third, and this is our last one we're going to run through, and then we're going to talk a little bit about metrics, is Michelle. Expecting a child, Michelle realizes that healthcare decisions don't stop with her delivery, but include her baby on the way and continue into a lifetime of care and well-being needs. So this is not just a 9-month or 12-month kind of pattern. This is a lifelong process. And the prenatal, birth, pediatric, and beyond decisions will fall squarely on her. While she has family and friends with children, there are a ton of questions and decisions that must be addressed. So in typical fashion, a 20-something-year-old, research is going to show that they might be hard-headed or headstrong or something, but their day-to-day stats are you see employment, you do see unemployment, or in some cases underemployment when you start talking about a 20-something-year-old, college graduate, never married, pops a lot, middle of the road political. You can see a lot of apartment and condo living as opposed to a traditional house, and this might not be the first child. There might be other children. They tend to be in some research analysis. They tend to be a little bit more materialistic. Money is a sign of success. They are not happy with their standard of living, and then they turn that to a point of putting family on the back burner and saying, I need to advance my lifestyle. I need to advance where I am. So they are willing to give up family time. They don't really want responsibilities, although, when push comes to shove, they will step up to the plate. And if you're having a baby, if push comes to shove, you got to step up to the plate. Very big in the, celebrity news, gossip. And they're not a big fan of helping others unless it benefits them. So from a healthcare standpoint, we're kind of going down the spectrum from Kimberly to David and Jennifer now to Michelle, where a 20-something is not the best at taking care of themselves. They don't do preventative medicine. They don't go see doctors regularly. If they are seeing a doctor, sometimes they don't listen to the doctor or follow his orders. They consider their diet not to be very healthy. They too go to work when they're sick, and they just figure they'll push through it. They're not really seeking information about nutrition or diet. So it's kind of a hard group to get in front of in terms of information on the healthcare world, because they're not actively seeking it out. So you almost have to force them to consume it. Cell phones, from a Michelle standpoint, it's a critical part of her life, to the point where you might even say it's an extension of her. Her friendships wouldn't be close without it. She purchased products she sees on cell phones. She stays connected to the social world. She uses her cell phone to get advice and information about decisions that need to be made. And she's as far away as possible from a group of people that would only use a cell phone to make basic phone calls. So her media habits, are what's to be expected. She pays attention to things in the movies, movie theater ads. She's light on the physically reading of a hard copy of a newspaper or a magazine. Newspaper, local information, local news is not really a huge value to her. And while she does watch ads, she doesn't use those as a decision-making process to buy particular products. From an internet and social media standpoint, though, she is influenced by what people say about products and services online, and she will reach out to her circle of friends to help make those decisions. The internet, social media is a primary source of entertainment. She spends less time watching TV or reading magazines because of it, and she enjoys posting and doing all the things that you would expect from a 20-something-year-old. Now, if you look at this quadrant down here in the bottom right, you look at cable, magazine, newspaper, primetime TV, and so forth. It's almost, I think it actually is complete opposite of what we saw when we talked about Kimberly, a 65-plus-year-old. So Kimberly being the caregiver for her sister, while Michelle is, we talked about it internally, while she's the patient and showing up for the doctor visits, you could actually have an argument of she's really the caregiver, because the patient is truly her child that's going to be born in a few months. So splitting hairs on patient versus caregiver, but either way, it's a completely different media habit, media pattern than what we saw with Kimberly in the 65 plus range. So strategy, Michelle's and people in that age group and that lifestyle, they have this inability to capture information from doctors or health professionals, because when they go and sit down and meet with somebody, they're more thinking about the procedures and what they need to do next versus listening to the information and instructions. And it's almost like they are pre-programmed to do their own thing. They feel like they're hard-headed, they're stubborn, and the internet can give them all the information that they need. So they're less likely to recall information that's been handed out or discussed while they're in their doctor's office. They're more anxious and uncertain because a lot of them, just being young in general, a lot of them in this segment haven't experienced some of these ailments before. It's new to them. So they are trying to wrestle with that and come to terms, especially if it's a really severe ailment. They're trying to come to terms and trying to figure out how to get treatment. Their mind isn't always the clearest, which, in many cases when I talked about the caregivers ask a lot of questions and they probably go overboard in some cases, but that's a huge plus. They're like sponges in terms of information. They want to ask and do research, where a younger audience thinks that they know everything, thinks that they can find everything at their fingertips, and it makes it a little bit more challenging. And it can be uncharted waters for you guys from a healthcare standpoint. It's a new audience. From a maternity standpoint, it's kind of, that's a sweet spot for your hospital and property. That's kind of old news. But if it's somebody being a caretaker, a caregiver for a parent, a grandparent, or so forth, this is some new territory for them, and they don't know how to react. So it's a brave new world for them. That's a plus, though, because they're looking for resources. They're looking for information to be given to them, to the point where, in some cases, they're actually looking for decisions to be made. So they want personalized information for, in this case, Michelle and her baby. They want to be able to have reminders that can keep them on track with their progress, but put information out there that almost is beyond a resource. It's definitely resource quality, but it points them to decision making and even maybe makes decisions for them. Because if you put it out there, by nature, they're going to find it. That's what they do. They feel like they can find these resources. So if you put a breadcrumb trail out there, they'll stumble on it at one point or another. All right, let's talk a little bit about metrics. Now, I know you guys have probably heard this term over and over, but I think it's well worth repeating. Half the money I spend on advertising wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. Years ago, ROI, tracking, reporting based on any campaign, any audience was kind of an afterthought. It really was just like, oh, I wonder what the ROI is. And nowadays it's become such a vital component. And rightfully so, because honestly, a lot of administrations in every industry actually, look at marketing and advertising as an expense item. It's an expense item on your profit and loss statement from a financial standpoint. And so when times get tough, budgets need to be cut, these expenses get whacked, and advertising is one of them. So being able to validate what the marketing is doing and show performance and show information in terms of conversions and so forth is paramount nowadays. So I put together just kind of a couple of slides to explain how some of the things that we go through with our healthcare clients, but also a little bit of an eye-opener to just say, look, there really is no one-size-fits-all. There's no template to this. What drives metrics and capturing information is really the people, is really the audiences that you go after, and the relevant media mix that you're implementing for their campaigns. The differences between a patient and a caregiver can be so huge, and it's not always about the title or the role of a patient versus caregiver, but it's more about their lifestyle. If they're older or younger, how does TV or radio usage, how is that impacted, or cell phones, and what is the role of the cell phone in their life? Do they use internet to gather information? Because a caregiver's age can span, decades. You're talking a couple of generations here. Same thing with a patient. A patient can be, 25 years old, maternity on the lower end. It could be 75-plus-year-old with, the aging process. So it's not this, oh, I have a caregiver. These are the metrics that I need to implement. It's more about, I have a caregiver. They fit a certain lifestyle. These are what they like. This is their daily lifestyle. This is what they go through on a regular basis. So these are the things that I'm going to track or study or capture in terms of metrics. So the metric side for us is, we kind of often refer back to the conversion funnel, decision-making process funnel, purchase funnel, whatever you guys call it. And there are many variations. And what I did was I broke it up into two slides. The first one being awareness, consideration, and preference. And regardless of who we're speaking to, patients or caregivers, each one of them is going to, and primarily based on age or lifestyle or how they live or their home situation, they're going to fall into awareness at various levels. And from a metrics and how to capture information and what information to capture, the awareness is standard ad metrics. These are impressions and reach and frequency. But as you go down that conversion funnel and start to get to the consideration phase or the preference phase, you start looking at information. They start looking at information that's more relevant to a particular service line that shows what their needs are. You get more tangible metrics, whether that's landing pages, experience interaction, visits, view-throughs, video completion rates. All of these things are going to be reflective by not a title of caregiver, but by really their lifestyle and where they are in their life. The bottom half of that conversion funnel, conversions, their actions, the loyalty, and then the result side, get to be more tangible things that we try and implement against whatever audience we're working with. The phone calls, the form completions. Do they get to the loyalty page stage where they're interacting with the brand on social media? There's the email components there, and then the results. Results are what CEOs, the executive teams want to see. Revenue, volume, increase in market share, payer mix, brand awareness. Now, a lot of these, especially on the previous page, are digital, so they're easy to capture from an information standpoint and from a tracking standpoint. So we do have, I do have a slide in a slide or two on the offline world and some best practices on how to kind of wrangle in the offline world. Because as we saw with Kimberly, digital really isn't her go-to thing. So it makes more sense in the print and the direct mail and the TV world. So, you look at these conversion opportunities, you look at these information in terms of, what you want to capture to help generate the results or to help see what the results are. And there's a lot of tools out there. You guys, depending upon the size of the hospital, size of the marketing team, y'all probably have some of these on board now. Some of them, are incredibly powerful, incredibly robust. They let you track email and blogs and landing pages and content and see how people are interacting with you, not only on your website, but in the social media world. There are also third-party systems that I'm going to talk about in a second that can help bring some of this information that you need to have at your fingertips so you can prove attribution, you can prove an ROI. There's great third-party systems. Some of them are free, some of them cost a few dollars. But if you're looking to implement some of these systems, some of the big questions that we encourage people to ask is, what are you trying to capture? When you think about attribution, you think about information you want to go after, what is the end result? What does the finish line look like in terms of that report? And say, I marketed to a caregiver versus a patient, and here's how that campaign and here's how that return was generated. If you're looking at systems, it's how does that system interact with your current systems in place? How can you manipulate that system in terms of, the reporting functionalities? What does it look like? How does it interact? Does this marketing automation system interact with your current systems? Are there add-ons that you need to consider? These things are a big undertaking because they usually require massive databases to be custom built. So it's a long process. So definitely, do your homework. In terms of tracking the offline world, it's very difficult, and it's got theoretically gotten more difficult when we see the ease of tracking and capturing information on the digital world. But the offline world, there's no reason to give up hope. We encourage brands and hospitals to, whenever possible, use digital methods, and that could be use specific phone numbers and use a call tracking system, use a Marchex or a call rail, use unique phone numbers, unique URLs, cardio.abchospital.com. All these allow you to capture information. While it might be, old school mailers going to somebody's house, if you have a unique URL, if you have vanity, or if you have a unique phone number, that's a great way to capture information to see how this campaign performed. Some of the third-party systems that I mentioned, I'm sure everybody is familiar with Google Analytics, Omniture. There's Optimizely to see how campaigns are working, kind of an A/B testing. I mentioned the phone systems. The phone systems are so powerful. It's an amazing tool, and it helps you study the offline world because you can get, you can track calls when they come in. You can use dynamic phone numbers. Dynamic phone numbers in that if you send a mailer out and you can put a specific number on that mailer, that phone number is going to ring. It's still going to go to your main, your main line or what have you, with the Marchex and the call rails of the world allow you to see that phone number rang, how long that call was, so you can determine was it, wrong number, it hung up in 10 seconds, or it went on for 2 or 3 minutes. It was probably a qualified call. So you can have dynamic numbers even on a landing page, so that when they do go to a landing page from a mailer, that dynamic phone number can follow them around your website. So that way, at any point, they stop snooping around the website and go, I need to call somebody based on this, service line information that they came across. That phone number is unique, it's dynamic, it's tied to that mailer, and so you can close the loop on reporting. These phone call systems also allow you to record. I know there's a lot of compliance regulations there in the healthcare industry as well as on the state level. But if possible, and you record these, recording is tremendously powerful. It lets you listen to the conversation, so you can get a firsthand understanding of what that patient or caregiver is really thinking, what they're really asking about, and that is worth its weight in gold to be able to grab a handful of those and kind of get a firsthand perspective of their feelings, their questions, the tone in their voice, and so forth. I mean, that's powerful. So that is ultimately, that's really what I have today. I appreciate it. I know I probably went a little bit quick. It's about 40 minutes, so I apologize if I ran over something a little too long or a little too quickly. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Well, thank you, Eric. Are there any questions? I'm looking at the questions section here, and I haven't seen any registered yet. But if you do have some, please feel free to throw them into that section, and we'll make sure that Eric sees those. You can ask them aloud so everyone can hear if they're not seeing it along the side. Well, see no questions. Perhaps we've got some people who are shy. I do want to thank you, Eric, for your presentation today. Before we do all sign off, I want to highlight a very important upcoming ISHMAPER event, and that is our fall conference. If you haven't signed up yet, I highly encourage you to do so. It is November 2nd and 3rd at the Hard Rock Hotel in Chicago. Registration is open. Please visit ishmacurry.org. You'll see it on the home page there. I've already taken a peek at the all-access passes and speakers and T-shirts, and this is definitely an event not to be missed. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy your afternoon, and if you do have any other questions, certainly you can, Eric has his email and phone number up there on the screen. You can take that down and contact him directly. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate the time.
Take care.
Bye.